So the purpose of this video is to move us from, we've started to chew a little bit on that first page of the long article, and I want you to be able to launch into the second and third part of his article, where he covers the idea of the three races that occupy a land and civil religion in America. And to get from our first chewings to your launching into being good readers of this full article, I think this will help you. That there is a architectural integrity to this encyclopedia entry. And if you understand and get the pieces of that architecture, and then you see that architecture still at work in the argument as he moves through time, that you will have an easier time reading Charles Long. I studied with him as a graduate student, and I continue to go anywhere. If I'm at a conference and he's speaking, I'm going to listen to him, because I have found that he has an insight on our moment in time and on this place called America that I often don't understand what he's getting at, and yet there are nuggets of it that I find as I then move out in the world, I am still using those nuggets, and important pieces regarding human nature and history keep falling into place. I think Long is one of the intellects of our time, and that by working through this, you can leave this course having at least been exposed to somebody whose take on how we think about who we are, how we think about what religion is, could possibly become important to your wisdom over the course of time. So let's try and unpack this a little bit further. We started with that heterogeneity of a Canada and a Mexico, and then we got our Hawaii and Alaska coming in. And then he moved through the three rhythms of time, and he talks about the contrast between a Mediterranean and an American mind frame. And in that contrast, he says that the Atlantic, unlike the Mediterranean, was not a revealer of deities. Poseidon didn't come out of Atlantis, of the Atlantic, as part of our understanding of the world, right? Our understanding and the American and the Atlantic that builds this America, it's not under the sign of revelation, but of freedom, civilizations, and rational orders. And you're going to see he's going to keep plugging at, so what did freedom mean in this American context when you have Europeans thinking and picturing occupying this land with an idea of the freedom that they were going to make happen. And you have an indigenous people undergoing this experience of freedom in ways that was not at all about freedom. And what did freedom mean to them? And what did this American context of indigenous freedoms that then get curtailed, how does that influence us today? And in terms of an African American community who is brought to be enslaved under a banner of freedom. Now that's going to give them a very critical perspective on freedom. And by critical, I don't mean negative. I mean, how's this freedom thing working? Critical in that they are going to be challenging assumptions about what is in that word. So he says, this is an America under the sign of freedom, civilizations. He's going to get into the three civilizations that come into contact on this America, and rational orders. So this was not about how Olympus was clearly in charge. This America comes together out of the Enlightenment sciences, putting things in rows, in places, in taxonomies and based on an economy, not out of a feudal sense of monarchs. Boy, aren't they next to God, and shouldn't I be so pleased that the king threw me a piece of bread, right? This is of market and capitalism and commodity. So this is that context. And then you're going to keep hearing that this is part of his architecture, and it's going to keep servicing through this article. And you're going to start feeling those things fall into place, and you'll know, oh, this is the part where we're getting into what freedom meant, and you'll see it repeats. Now, we move down then into the idea that Long's not going into the churches to find religion. Rather, he's arguing that religion, for our purposes, is defined as orientation, how a people becomes aware of its place in the temporal spatial order of things. Right? We're not walking into a church to find religion. We are analyzing how humans make meanings in the temporal spatial order of things. We are doing meta-analysis of the meaning-making process as itself religion. Now, he says that orientation expresses creativity because each person involved is in a meaning-making task. What is the meaning of being near Heart Mountain? This is going to be part of our question today in this course. So the meaning-making implies a creativity at work and also critique. Because if one is undergoing experiences regarding the temporal phases, we recently underwent an economic crisis, right? That was a temporal event, a kind of grinding to a halt that we have experienced. So temporal spatial experience that through that gives us this challenge, this critique, meaning the capacity to challenge the assumptions that have this kind of geological force in our life. So the people who question monarchy as part of our foundation, we are a people of critique. Not only did we have those colonists questioning the assumptions of the land they left, but then we have two other civilizations at work asking us, how is this freedom thing at work if what we have been done is devastated by disease, placed onto reservations, or argue we either assimilated or died, and from in terms of enslavement, then all men are created equal. You would have a critical perspective on the meaning of America if you were one of the members of that civilization in what came together. He says this is not a simple task. It is by its very nature a dialectical process, right? That you engage, you create a meaning, you step back with an assumption that gets challenged. It's a feeding and taking, giving and taking process. It is precisely in the act of creating one's world that the world is understood as having been already given. So that as each of us makes our way, let's say Flag Day, as each of us makes our way through Flag Day, negotiating with what does Flag Day mean to me, there's that American flag, one has the sense that it is America. It was already given to me, and it is my job to be a good citizen in it, even though what I am doing is actually creating what America is while so doing. So it is precisely in the act of creating one's world that the world is understood as having been already given. It is just right that Cody is here. And then in the case of part of what we're going to look at in this course, the creation of a reservation and the removal of people who had always lived here to that reservation. When I am born and raised in Wyoming, I receive Wyoming as having already been given. You know, it's got 4 lines, real easy to pick out on the map. We got our Yellowstone. It was a given. It is an entity of its own. And part of Long's point is we have to create this. It is in the act of creating ourselves as people in Wyoming that we come to understand Wyoming as something that is given and the truth, the reality of the situation. All right, so I am hoping that from there, he does it. I think I can cover one more little bit here. As he goes through this vague somewhat and something other, this is really important, and it might strike one as just oddly general. But the idea that in bumping up onto this place and mistaking it and its people as India and Indians, that a rhetoric of discovery is how the dominant discourse, the dominant groups of America understood and told themselves about discovering it, but that he wants to argue that this, in line with that European Enlightenment and the growth of the sciences that happened out of the Enlightenment, that in really what we need to understand is that America was invented. It was an invention, like the microscopes and the, what do you call the thing that you look at the stars with? You guys know. And that our timepieces and all of the clever inventions of this era, that America itself can be understood as an invention, and that the inventors had at work a European mind frame about things that were not as civilized, as European as they were. And it was inventing the people they were encountering as an Indian. And he says something, he goes on to explain, we're talking here about Baudet's work, he goes on to explain that the knowledge gained from concrete empirical relationships, right? We know that the early colonists who survived because they learned how to plant from their neighbors who were there. They learned about storing corn. They learned skills of fighting and skills of hunting. And yet, having learned these technologies, they still managed to understand these people who lived there before them as primitive, as dangerous, as something that Thomas Jefferson said, they will kill some of us, we will kill all of them. So that even in that empirical exchange of information with these people whose land you entered, they were still using a European imagination, able to turn these people into uncivilized people for which one has a justification for domination. So this invention happens on a contact zone where different kinds of power come into relationship with each other. European settlement, indigenous peoples, African, enslaved Africans. It's a contact zone where power is asymmetrical. It's not, each of these people arrives with a different kind of power and invents and figures out who they are.